10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 439. Hey everybody, welcome back to the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 439. Hope 2025 is treating you well so far. Did you learn au revoir and practice that piece of vocabulary? I hope you did, because we are going to move on to a different Charlie Parker tune today. And in this one, I'm going to ask you to do a few more measures. And then if you're really feel like practicing a lot this week, I'll give you a secondary assignment. And then we're going to learn a new piece of vocabulary based off of this melody. So as I mentioned last week, the goal for this month is to use bebop melodies as a launching point for learning new bebop vocabulary, because these melodies are really, I think, the pinnacle of bebop vocabulary, because as I said, they're just basically solos that are really well structured and that these bebop players liked enough to write down and record forever and put their name on. So that's a pretty good sign of something that is going to be really quality. So the composition that we're going to use this week is the great Charlie Parker tune Ornithology, not to be confused with Anthropology, which I always confuse. And actually, Ornithology, great title for a piece of music written by the man known as Bird, because ornithology is the study of birds. So this is a great 32-bar tune with an amazing melody. And if you didn't know, but I'm sure a lot of you do, the chord changes are based off of the great jazz standard, How High the Moon. So if you study this tune, you learn the melody and you learn the chord changes, all you have to do is learn the melody to How High the Moon, which is a lot simpler than Ornithology. And you'll know two tunes, which is really great. And those are a couple of jazz standards that get called very often. So this will be a great study for you. Now, the first thing I would like you to do, and I'll kind of do this as like two tiers. So the first tier would be to take the first 16 bars and learn it. Because this is 32 bars, it's a lot. It's a lot to do in 1 week. So if you only have so much time to practice every week and you're working on some other stuff, just make it your goal to learn the first 16 bars. And I promise you the second half of the tune will come a lot faster. But if you're somebody that really wants to get after it and you've got a lot of time to practice and you're ready to dive in with both feet, go ahead and make it your goal to learn this entire melody this week. Okay, so that would be the first thing. If you're going to learn it with a recording, which I highly suggest, you might want to slow it down a little bit. All of the original recordings of Bird playing this are like really fast. So I don't know, there's a couple of schools of thought of like whether you should slow things down or not, but I'm a believer in slowing things down just for the simple fact that it makes you more likely to actually do it. If you're trying to learn something at the original tempo, especially a tune like this, there's a lot of barriers in the way in terms of learning the actual notes and the rhythms, but also being able to play it at this absolutely breakneck speed. So I would say go ahead and slow it down. And there's so many tools out there now. YouTube, you could just slow it down right on YouTube and transcribe off of there. So anyway, that's your sort of two tiers, either the first 16 or the entire melody. And then what we are going to do is grab a piece of vocabulary and move it through all 12 keys. And the piece of vocabulary that we are going to grab is the opening phrase from this tune. So this tune is in the key of concert G, and we're just going to go ahead and grab the first 4 bars. And the reason why I love this so much is it's basically all based off of scale movement. And when I say scale movement, what I actually mean is that most of the intervals are some type of second. It does jump around a little bit, but really it's going to make sure that we can play this particular scale segment in all 12 keys. Listen to it again and listen to how scalar it is. Now, the other thing that's really, really, really cool about it is that it goes from concert G major and then it morphs into G minor. What's happening with the chords is it goes from G major 7 and then it starts a 2-5 to concert F major. So when we get that 2 chord in F major, that's a G minor chord. So we hear this. Boo 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 doo boo doo dun. Boo 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 bop boo doo doo be dun dot boo dee dee dot. Okay, so it's really, really going to be good for us because it's going to, first of all, test our ability to play this pattern in a major scale. But then we have to immediately switch it to minor. And I think you can hear that. It's the difference between this note and that note. So it's just a really, really useful piece of vocabulary to learn in all 12 keys. And last week we did our progression through the keys. We did it in whole steps. But this week, what we're going to do is we're going to practice a different order because switching up the order is really, really important. We don't want to always take things through 12 keys in the same order because we can settle into that order. And it's amazing how our brain immediately goes to patterns, right? I've talked about this on the show before. So what we're going to do this time is we're going to move it through the circle of fourths. So, we'll play it in G. Then we'll go up to C. Then we'll go to F. And so on and so forth through all 12 keys around the circle of fourths. So that's going to be our challenge for this week. What I'm going to do for the Patreon members is I'm going to give a bunch of tracks at different tempos, moving through all 12 keys so that you have something to practice with if you want to. And then even better than having something to practice with, you will have something to test yourself against, right? If you take this at a moderate tempo, let's say 132, and you can make sure that you can get through all 12 keys without stopping, you're pretty sure that you have that thing under your fingers. You've got that transposition down, and you really know that piece of vocabulary. So it's a great test before next week's episode where we will learn something new. Okay, so I'm going to do that for all the Patreon members. I'm also going to give you a little worksheet that has the keys listed out in order that you can practice with. So a whole ton of stuff over there. Now, if you're not sure what I'm talking about, that's the way that we keep this podcast going is by listeners just like you supporting us every month in the form of a small donation. And in return for that, you get a whole bunch of jazz education materials. We don't do any ads on the show, so we just rely on people like you. It's a listener-supported podcast, I like to say. We do that through the Patreon platform, and you can find out more information, get yourself signed up by going to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, clicking on one of the Patreon banners, or you can go to patreon.com and simply search for the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. Get yourself signed up, and you get instant access to every single episode that we've ever done, which is obviously quite a few at this point. So again, 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, or patreon.com, search for the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. And your assignment this week is to one of two things. You could either learn the first 16 bars to ornithology, or you could learn the entire melody, depending on how much time you have, how much effort you can put in this week. And then you're going to learn that opening piece of vocabulary through all 12 keys around the circle of fourths. All right, have fun with this, and I will see you next week with another exercise. Have a good weekend, everybody. Bye.